Bloating got you down? Bathroom visits dictating your schedule? If you're fed up with the constant discomfort and unpredictable gut issues, this video is for you. We're pulling back the curtain on what the root causes that are sabotaging your digestive function so that we could stop guessing and start fixing. Stay tuned for game-changing insights and simple steps that will tame the bloat so that you can get back on track with your life. Now, some of the comments that I get from my patients, I'm going to run through them. There's a bit of feeling and perspective into what people are experiencing with these types of issues. I feel like there's a monster in here. I feel 9 months pregnant. It's probably the most common one. I'm so embarrassed about my gut sounds. I had a patient that was in a board room meeting and their gut was so bloated and making so much sound that they had to walk out of the meeting. It was so loud. I was so embarrassed. The photos of distended bellies is a common one that I get as well. And it is something that I really enjoy being able to remove this because it's such an impact on your life. You're walking around with constant discomfort, tight jeans, etc. The best place to start to explain what is going on here within these people's guts is to look at what it is gas filling up the small intestine and some parts of the large intestine or bowel. Now, I'm going to go through what gases are produced in the small intestine in excess amounts. Now, the three main gases that we find within the gut are hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen, and methane. Now, hydrogen sulfide smells like rotten eggs, so that's a key indicator. It generally sends my patients rushing to the toilet. I mean, they have to run, and they have explosive diarrhea, and that's got that smell associated with it, and they're, of course, bloated with this gas. Hydrogen doesn't smell. It bloats a lot. So a lot of my patients that are really distended, their bellies are coming out here after each meal that they're eating, and especially at the end of the day, generally that's hydrogen. Producing copious amounts. It speeds up the movement or transit, as we say, through the bowel, so you produce lots of stools and they're generally loose. The last gas is methane. Now, methane doesn't smell either. It does bloat people, but it generally bloats them all the time. So these are the people that are waking up in the morning bloated, and then it gets worse with each meal, and it's worse at the end of the day, but they get no relief. If I go back to hydrogen or hydrogen sulfide, they generally wake up the most comfortable then. They have what they term a flat belly. They're not bloated until they start eating food. Methane is different. You're waking up bloated and uncomfortable. Also, they'll describe their belly as pretty rock hard. So that is a big indicator that they're producing quite a bit of methane. And methane slows down the transit or movement through the bowel. So these people are very constipated. So if you're constipated and bloated, you're more than likely producing methane as a gas. Now, you can produce all three or two or one. So you can have a mixture of symptoms. So that gets complicated, and it's where an experienced practitioner can give you really good insights of the stages of treatment of them and where you're going to fit and what your bowel's going to do throughout it, because one's sending you to the toilet in a rush, one's sending you to the toilet all the time, and one's sending you to the toilet never, and you're not even producing a stool for 4 days. So it can get a bit complicated. Why do you have an excess of these gases? What's happening is a process called fermentation. You're eating food that has either fiber, sugar, or a starch. Collectively, we call the last two carbohydrates. The other one is a polyol, which is a sugar-like compound. But all of these are just food for microbes to feed on. And if you've got an excess of them, an excess of these products in your dietary pattern, which generally occurs in the small intestine, because that's where our food dumps out of the stomach into that small intestinal area, and there's lots of food that is for bacteria or fungi, or there's another organism called an archaea. Future video, I'll talk about some things there. But basically, the small intestine is an area where this can occur. So you pop that foods in, the bacterial, or I should say collectively the microbes feed on it, and then what they excrete is gas. and other products. And it depends on the bacteria. So you have some that love to feed on hydrogen, also carbohydrates and fibers, as well as sulfur. And then they'll produce hydrogen sulfide. Now, why would this be an issue? Because normal digestive processes, this wouldn't happen. A lot of people I speak to essentially go, well, I was fine there and now I'm not fine. And I'm bloated, distended, uncomfortable, and hearing all sorts of stuff going on in my gut. What's happened? Now, some of the examples that we see that contribute to these gas overproductions and all this fermentation occurring is post-infectious IBS. And I'll run through some further ones. But the first one, and this one's quite common, is I go away to Bali and I got a gastro over there, got over that, was horrible, spewing and diarrhea everywhere. Then I come back home to Australia and I haven't been well since. Now, what happens here is you've either had, salmonella or an E. coli or Campylobacter infection. These are common food-borne infections that you get from the tropics or in areas where there's less sanitation. And it leaves a little mark on the intestine. What happens is the intestine doesn't move as fast, and I'm referring to the small intestine, doesn't move as fast. Therefore, it slows down. That's a really important aspect to remember, because if the small intestine slows down, it's not moving rhythmically to keep the bacteria that are high in the bowel down in the bowel, they slowly creep up and start to populate. The bacteria just want to feed on more and more food, so they'll go where there's more food, small intestine, and they'll start to overpopulate that area. Now, if it goes far enough, you start to get another condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or it's nicknamed SIBO. You can also get a fungal aspect of it as well, called SIFO. Very original name. So what happens there is you've built up a large population of bacteria that are producing those gases I mentioned before. So hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen or methane, just depends on the mixture that crept up to the small intestine. And every time you eat, you are putting in those foods, which are very common. Most of my patients are going to be consuming a fiber, a sugar, or a starch in nearly all of their meals. Essentially, those microbes feed on it and produce tons and tons and tons of gas all the time, and just goes around the circle and you feel horrible. The intestinal sulfide overgrowth, that one is worth mentioning separately. So essentially, it means that you naturally do have a degree of sulfur-reducing type bacteria in your gut, and then you do have foods high in sulfur. So let's say meats, egg yolks, and brassicas. So broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts. These all have sulfur in there. Sulfur is generally a really good thing to be consuming, sulfur-rich foods. But let's say you had an antibiotic come in for a random infection. Say you had bronchitis or pneumonia or something of that nature. You needed to take the antibiotic. Or you had a food poisoning. So like the example I gave with the Bali incident. And what happens is the imbalance changes. Hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria go up, and your normal diet filled with healthy foods starts to produce undesirable effects. And that's an intestinal sulfide overgrowth, or ISO is what we nicknamed that one. Those conditions, there's other contributors to them. So I've listed off, the post-infectious example. I've listed off the post-antibiotic example. We also have hyperthyroidism, so your low in thyroid hormone, which essentially slows down the action of the gut, and that the event where the bacteria creep up the intestinal tract to where all your food is located, up higher in the small intestine. Sometimes you can get an operation. So let's say you needed an abdominal operation. This is a common one for women that need endometriosis or endometrial tissue cut out because of a condition called endometriosis. They'll get a little bit sticky adhesions in the abdominal cavity, and that can kind of stick and slow down the bowel or the small intestine. And then the last one is basically stress. If you've got lots of stress going on, you're getting a reduced level of intestinal or digestive function. So essentially, chronic stress is slowing down the digestive tract and then creating the imbalances. And I forgot one that's very important to mention. This will be the last cause that we generally look at, and it's what we call malabsorption issues. So the most common malabsorption issue that we find is with the sugar lactose. So lactose intolerance. That's very common throughout the world. There's only a select few genetics that concentrate the ability to digest lactose past the age of 4. The other one is fructose malabsorption, so fruit sugars and sugars that are from, let's say, maple or honey or sugarcane will have fructose in them, and people have a genetically lower amount of ability to absorb fructose. So essentially they eat those foods, let's say a couple of peaches in there, they go down, they take ages to be absorbed, that fruit sugar, and then they can feed lots of gut bacteria. So that's one, a lot more common in people of heritage in temperate regions, so north and south, generally not as common as people in the tropics. Most of the populations there are eating tons of fruit, so it grows there a lot more readily. And all year round. There's some of the conditions that we find. Now, where do you get help so that you can find treatments for these conditions? The best place to start is to see someone that has got good nutritional knowledge. So they could be a nutritionist or a naturopath or an integrative doctor. And these people will be able to prescribe the right dietary practices so that you can lower the amount of foods that are fermenting and start to look at antimicrobials either from the herbal world, so like oregano oils is a good example, or berberine-containing herbs, or we look into antibiotics. And some of the antibiotics that are prescribed in these conditions is rifaximin and neomycin. You need a professional to prescribe them to make sure they're suitable for you. So make sure you seek medical advice before taking any of those. At Fugen Health, we offer these services. So if you want to get help here, please reach out to us. If I can't help you, I'll find someone that will and refer you into the best direction. So leave a comment down there. I'll forward through to our email address to find more information via myself. There are commonalities in terms of how we approach it. And I wouldn't mind offering you some starting kind of approaches so you can start feeling less bloated, less uncomfortable, and get a bowel that cooperates with you a lot more than what it is now. 4-hour gaps between meals. The digestive process needs to happen in a sequence. If you're nibbling all day, well, then that sequence slows down. Don't want the gut to be further slowed down because that's going to worsen the conditions that I just listed off before. So have 4-hour gaps between each meal so that the digestive process can complete itself. Don't drink large volumes of water with your meals. It dilutes all of your digestive juices, which means that you're going to digest things slower and then leave more and more food available for microbes to feed on, ferment, and create more gas. This goes into the previous one, the 4-hour gaps between meals, is remove snacking. Nibbling on food, and generally most of the snacks we have in our Western dietary patterns is filled with loads of sugars, loads of starches, and even if you get the sugar-free ones, they've got polyols in there that'll bloat you. Now, if you want further information on some of the foods that we would avoid in treatment for these conditions, go through on my list and find the one on fermentative foods and the foods to avoid if you're feeling bloating. Very, very helpful resource, and I'll go through all of the foods that contribute to symptoms like I've listed in this video. Please reach out, start some of those steps there so that you can have a digestive system with essentially the 0 symptoms that I work with my patients, which is you feel hungry, you feel full, you feel the need to pass a stool. And that's really all you want to feel with your digestive tract. And wouldn't that be nice to get to? Thanks, everyone. Stay tuned for future videos. I'll go through further conditions that I help people with in my clinical practice. Bye.